All right, welcome everyone to the 2015 May edition of Milwaukee Perl Mongers. This month we have our special guest Jeffrey Thalhammer, who's going to give us a overview of his side project called Stratopan. You may have heard of Jeffrey Thalhammer and his work on Perl Critic. Like it or love it, it's the de facto standard for making sure your Perl code is following all the right rules. We personally use it at work and have a Git pre-commit hook to enforce our team's standards on the policies that we've chosen. So we make a lot of good use out of it, and we thank you for all the effort you put into that. It's definitely saved a lot of hassle with arguments, especially over how to do things. So this lets me say, do it this way, and force everyone to do that. So appreciate it. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeffrey, and if you guys have any questions, feel free to speak up somehow. I'm gonna go on mute, but thanks again, Jeffrey. Go ahead.
Oh, hi everybody. My name is Jeff Thalhammer. Thank you, Steve, for the invitation to meet you all in Milwaukee. I have a little Milwaukee story. I don't know, it's not a very good one. I've never been to Milwaukee, but my grandparents lived in St. Louis, so we would always go there in the summers. And one of my most vivid childhood memories, I guess, was the 1982 World Series against the St. Louis Cardinals against the Milwaukee Brewers. And my grandfather was a big Cardinals fan, and he convinced me that Milwaukee was this evil place where evil baseball players live. I grew up thinking very unkind thoughts about Milwaukee and Wisconsin. But the Cardinals won the '82 World Series. I don't know, have the Brewers been?
Thanks for reminding us. No, appreciate it. Thanks for reminding us. We forgot.
Have the Brewers been in contention of late?
What was it? 3 years ago? Or 2 years ago? 3 years ago, they were in the yeah. So yeah, it's been a rebuilding year for the last 20 years.
Okay. Well, it took many years, but I eventually wisened up and realized that my grandfather was full of shit, and that Wisconsin is a fine place. I really enjoyed the UFC out there a few years ago in Madison. Maybe someday I'll make the Milwaukee proper.
Yeah. Big props to JT Smith from the Madison Perl Mongers for doing a great job with that conference. So,
yeah, that was
good guy.
So as Steve mentioned, I'm probably best known for Perl Critic, that module that everybody loves to hate. A few years ago, I started on another project which turned into what is now called Pinto, which is a sort of pause in a box, right? It's your own version of pause that you can run on your servers and put whatever distributions you want in it. And that's what brought us to this conversation here today. I wish I could get a show of hands to see what everybody says. So how many of you use a lot of CPAN modules? Like, say, 100 or more? I see one hand down there. About 500 or more? Maybe? All right. Well,
we got hands that are probably around, I don't know. These guys are guessing they use 300 to 500 modules.
Okay, that's great. That's great. I love to hear that. One of the real turning points in my career as a software developer was realizing that my code sucked and that other people's code was generally better. So, and learning how to leverage the CPAN, but it took a long time to learn how to trust CPAN and learn how to work around it. It caused a lot of problems, especially once you start having all these dependencies, you expose yourself to a lot of risks. And one of the risks is that the public CPAN is unstable. It can change at any time. Authors like me can put out new releases, buggy or incompatible. And if you're using some sort of automated build system and downloading packages from the public CPAN and the pause index, you're always just going to get whatever the latest version is, unless you're very careful about how you build your system. And I can introduce bugs into your stack, and that's a huge problem, especially if you have hundreds of modules. You want to stay relatively current with them, and if you're using, say, a cloud architecture where you might be spinning up machines and building them up from bare metal all the time. So that problem, I was working on that problem with at a company at Genentech, and that's what gave rise to Pinto. So Pinto solves that problem by giving you your own stable CPAN. You can put whatever modules you want in it, and you can. It's sort of a version control system that you can use. It's on CPAN itself, so you can download it and install that. But what we're going to talk about today is sort of the icing on the Pinto cake. How many of you are Pinto users now, or Carton, or Mini CPAN? One of the above.
We get a lot of Carton users. You guys use any of those? Pinto or okay? Just CPAN shell. But yeah.
Okay. So you, especially the Carton users, you guys are familiar with the problem I'm talking about, the instability and the need to be reproducible with your builds. So Pinto and Carton are sort of competing projects. They take very different approaches to this, but they're trying to address the same problem. Pinto is great, Carton is great, but it's still it's a part of the puzzle that I have to manage. Especially with Pinto, it's a repository. You can put a server on top of it. It's a lot like having a Git for a CPAN. It's a version control specifically for CPAN. But it's something you have to manage. It's another part of your development infrastructure. And the trend nowadays is to outsource a lot of that stuff, right? I don't want to have to run my own Git repository. I don't want to have to run my own bug tracking system. I just want all that stuff in the cloud, always accessible, and someone else just takes care of it. Make sure the servers are up, bandwidth is good, disks are not full, etc. So if you're, so what we've done is we put together this thing called Stratopan, which is a hosted service built on top of Pinto. It's your own private CPAN in the cloud where you can put your modules, pull down public modules from the CPAN. You get a lot of really nice UI on top of it, and you can drive your whole build system from your Stratopan repository. And so normally I would have this deck of slides we would run through right now, but that's missing, and I have to get to a meeting in about 45 minutes. So we're going to just jump straight to the live demo. If anybody wants to interject a question, now would be the time. Oh, silence?
Yeah, we're good here. Thanks.
All right, I'll do the screen share now. Mm-hmm. Ooh. It's like the infinite tunnel or something.
Yay!
All right. So Stratopan is modeled a lot on GitHub. I'm really a huge GitHub fan. Can you see the screen? Dependency heaven? Yes.
Yeah, it looks great.
I'm a big fan of GitHub. Git drives me crazy, but GitHub I really like. So Stratopan is modeled after that. A lot of the UI and the hierarchy and stuff. I'm just go ahead. I've already got an account for myself. I'm going to log in. And what you have are repositories, just like you have Git repositories on GitHub. Here in Stratopan, you have Pinto repositories. This is really useful if I use it especially for consulting. You can see here I've done work for Apple and Coverity and Genentech, and each of these clients all have their own set of modules that they use in their environment. And I hate working in their environment, usually. I want to work on my laptop. I want to be able to reproduce that environment on my laptop and work conveniently offline with my preferred set of tools and things like that. So what I often do is I'll set up a Pinto repository, and what I'll do is I'll stick in it all of the different modules that they use in that environment. So at Apple, for example, they usually run. They have 3 different operating systems that they support at any one time, and those might all have slightly different sets of modules on them, slightly different versions of the modules. So in this case, and this is work I did about 3 or 4 years ago, I set up 3 different repositories to track each of those environments. So I could make a build for Snow Leopard. I could make a build of the application for Line, and every time I make that build using CPAN or CPAN-M or the CPAN shell or whatever, I would get the exact same modules. Now you're probably asking, well, this is all great, but how did all this get here? And so that is what we'll talk about next. Let's go ahead and make a new repository. And is that right? Is that right?
A before you.
All right.
Perfect.
All right. And let's I don't know, let's say 520. We'll make this a public repository.
Nice.
One of the key things about Stratopan, it is hopefully someday an actual commercial enterprise. Some people do use it for production now. It's sort of been in a beta for about a year now, but there are some small consultancies and some, I would say, medium-sized Perl shops that use this in production to build their systems. So you can have public or private repositories. We'll make this one public. And I get a repository, and each repository has what are called stacks, which are roughly analogous to what you would think of as branches in Git or SVN. Presented with a default stack called master. And let's say our application uses, I don't know, what's your favorite framework, right?
Yeah, Catalyst is good.
Catalyst. So you probably use this very specific version of Catalyst. Well, Stratopan knows about everything that's ever been on CPAN. So you punch in Catalyst, and it will tell you about every version of Catalyst that has ever been released. And you can pick the one that you use. You don't have to take the latest. You can pick the one that you want. So let's say, I'll go back to 90085. I can leave a log message. I'll go say pull. So now what's going to happen is, behind the scenes, Stratopan is going to go out to the public CPAN, get Catalyst and all of its dependencies, and bring them into this repository here. And at that point, they'll be frozen, at least until you decide to change it. So you can build your application from these dependencies over and over and over again, and you'll always get the same sets of modules installed. Catalyst is kind of a big one, so this takes a little bit of time. But and so if you're working with a legacy application, you might repeat this process for all of your top-level dependencies. Or I have a set of tools that I sort of lease out as part of my consulting, which will do this for you automatically. It'll figure out what's in your environment, and then the exact versions of all the modules you have, and then spin up a repository that has exactly those things in it. So this is a view of the stack itself now that we've pulled in Catalyst. And we can just kind of poke around, and you can drill in and see the different things that are in here. There's a little bit of search feature where I can filter down the results to find the different things. And there's a history. Every change is recorded with a log message, and Pinto will keep track of the diffs. There just isn't a UI for that on Stratopan yet. Sometimes it's really interesting, or it's really important to understand how your dependencies relate to one another. So Stratopan gives you these graphs that show you the relationship between everything in the stack. So for example, class data inheritable is used by Catalyst runtime. Or if I needed to know, okay, well, how does HTTP body affect the rest of my application? If I wanted to upgrade that module, what other things does it touch, and might I want to test or pay special attention to? And these graphs can get pretty big and gnarly, so you can spin them around. Oftentimes they'll take up more screen space than you actually have, so you can spin them around to make them a little more accessible. But this same kind of graph is available on Meta CPAN. I worked out a little deal with Olaf to add this feature to Meta CPAN. But so for any distribution, I'll just pick one of my own. Right over here on the right-hand side, there's this little dependency graph button. And it will show you, oh, it's a big one. It'll show you that same graph for that distribution. So this is another way of seeing the distribution of the relationship for everything that's on CPAN. The difference is with Stratopan, you're getting the view of what's in your stack. So this is specific to your application, to your repository, and the particular versions of the modules that you have in there. Whereas the one that you see on Meta CPAN, this is basically based on the latest version of everything that's on the public CPAN. So I found this really helpful from time to time to be able to use this to analyze what causes or where a certain dependency is coming from. You know, sometimes you'll see a weird, strange-looking module in your dependency tree, and you want to know, like, well, why is that there, and do we really need it? And this helps to answer that kind of question. All right, so back to Stratopan here. Some of the more fine-grained settings. Every version of Perl has different sets of modules in its core, especially the last release, 5.22. Are we on 5.22? Or maybe it's the one that's about to come out, 5.22.
About to come out.
Yeah, they've dropped quite a few modules from it. So when you use Pinto or Stratopan, one of the things you need to tell it is the target Perl version that you're using. That helps it to figure out exactly whether or not the core Perl has a sufficient version of say, MakeMaker or some core module like that, whether or not the core has a version of that module that will satisfy a dependency. So once you've got a stack created, and let's say we've pulled in a couple of different things. Right, let's pull in one more, just for fun, and we'll go Perl critic. Yeah, that one. Suspense builds, building. Ah, there it is.
Yay!
So once you have a stack, then the fun begins. You can use this little command up here to install the things from your stack. And this works especially well with CPAN minus. If you're using the CPAN shell, it's a little bit more configuration work to get it to do this, but the principle is basically the same. You point your installer client at the URL of your repository, and that's just the same URL that you see up here in the browser. Right, so I'm gonna go ahead and grab this little command. I'm gonna copy and paste it into a shell. Let's start up a shell. Dun, dun, dun. So I heard the new Macs came out the other day, so I'm excited to replace this one soon. Yeah, you can see why I want to replace it.
Yeah, we were wondering if you're going to get a gold one.
Ooh. All right, I'll just jump into a little temporary directory here. Get rid of all that stuff. And, oh my, there's a bunch. So I'll just paste that command in, and let's say install Catalyst, and I'm going to add one more option here. I'm just going to, I don't want to install this into my system Perl or my Perl brew Perls. I'm just going to install it into this little sandbox directory right here. So we fire that up, and CPAN-M takes off and starts installing everything. But you'll notice right here in the URLs, I like that. It's fetching everything from this Stratopan repository, which is under my control. It's only going to change when I decide to change it. So this is the part of the system you might automate with your continuous integration or your continuous deploy system, whatever mechanism it is you use. You just install modules from here instead of the public CPAN. Or if you happen to have a private mini CPAN that you're using, you could just use Stratopan instead, and your repository would then be available anywhere. So you don't have to worry about firewalls or accessibility issues or things like that. Now, if we had a private repository, I think that's a lot more interesting for most commercial situations. I'm going to go ahead and change the settings on this to a private repository. And I'm going to go back to look at my stack. And now I get a slightly different command up here. The big difference right here is there are some credentials that go into the URL. My username and an access token, which is a randomly generated thing. You could treat that like a password. It's not something you hand out to people. You can generate a new one if it gets compromised or something like that. So that's how you achieve security with your private repository. So if I go back to here, and run that command again, it'll probably fail. Yes, because it can no longer reach that repository. Now, unfortunately, CPAN- isn't the most doesn't have the most helpful error messages. But I just wanted to demonstrate that the repository is secure. You can't reach it unless you know unless you have the username and an access and the matching access token. All right, so now we'll get into some more interesting stuff. Most of the time, your distributions, hopefully, are not fixed, right? They change over time. You want to adopt new versions, try out new modules that come onto CPAN. I hope that you're not one of those shops that's sort of frozen in time and is only allowed to use the Perl that they have on hand. We want to be able to use new stuff and change stuff whenever it becomes available. But we want to do that in a controlled way. We don't want to break product. We don't want to break production. I don't even want to break other people's development environments. I want to be able to do that privately and locally so that I don't mess things up. And one way that we can do that with Stratopan is we can copy this stack, we'll give it a name, other stack. And now I've essentially, well, I wouldn't say forked, but I've made a new branch within my repository. It's separate from the master branch. If I jump back here to the repository view, I can now see, yes, we have my other stack and master stack. And right now, they're both identical. And what I can do now is jump in here, and let's say I want to try out the new version of Catalyst. Remember before we pulled, like, I don't know, 59085? Well, you know, John Napierkowski has just released this new version. It's super badass. We don't know if it's going to work, though. We want to smoke test it with our application. So I want to download it, and I want to get all of its new dependencies if there are any upgrades that are required. Okay, and so now I have a stack that has the same stuff as the master stack with the new version of Catalyst upgraded. And one way to see that a little easier is I can filter that, and I could see the master stack has 90085. My other stack has 590092. Now we're working on a diff view that would make this a lot easier to understand. But that so that's in the pipe. But now I have this other stack, and if I want to smoke test this, again, I just use the same thing. I have a command here that I can use to install Catalyst or any other module from this stack. It's just the only difference is the stack name. So I can change dependencies here. I can try out different things. I can make a separate build and find out if a new dependency is going to work out with my system without disrupting the master stack, the mainline set of dependencies that all my teammates are using. So that's a very cool feature for doing team development. The other thing that really sets Pinto and Stratopan apart from Carton is the ability to add your own distributions. Carton is great for managing stuff that comes out of the public CPAN. But there's a lot of cases, if you're a sufficiently sophisticated shop, or you have a sufficiently complex application, you'll start building your own distributions. Even if you don't release it on CPAN, you still want to use the CPAN toolchain to leverage the whole process of dependency resolution and building and testing and installing and things like that. So you might start building your own distributions. Now, even if you don't do that, there's a lot of times where you might be using a public CPAN module and you find a bug or you want to fork it in some way. And so you make let's say maybe you clone the Git repository and you make a patch to it. And for whatever reason, you can't get that patch pushed upstream. Right? So you're basically forked now. You're on a different path than the main than the public version. But now you have a problem. How do you install that module? How do you get it into your build process? Because it's not in the public CPAN. Well, you can solve that problem with Stratopan because you can just add it here. And I can pick any distribution from my local file system and upload it here to Stratopan. I'm not sure I actually have any code right here that would work. All right, there's one. Perfect. So here I've got a version of URI that, let's just pretend that I've patched it. There was some bug in it, and I've decided to patch it. So I've changed the distribution name slightly so that I know that it's different from the real URI on the public CPAN. And go ahead and add that to my repository. And now, when I build my application, if something needs URI, it'll get the version that I put in there, URI 134 patched. So those are the basic use cases or the basic usage patterns for Stratopan. The use cases are specifically, like I mentioned before, consulting work. If you're an independent kind of guy, you have a lot of different environments that you work in, and you need to juggle them somehow. So using Stratopan in combination with Perl Brew works out marvelously, right? Also, it's a way of delivering applications to clients. One of the complicated parts about being a consultant is, it's easy for me to write code in their repository or just give my clients whatever source code I write, but I want to use dependencies. So how do I give those to my client? And this is how I do it now. I set them up with a Stratopan repository, and I say, this is where you get your dependencies from. I might even give them a shell script that will just sort of automatically build the application from these dependencies. And then sometimes I will manage the dependencies for them going forward, upgrading things when necessary, or they'll just manage it for themselves. Also, I said there are some fairly large shops that use this as their central point of managing distributions for their entire enterprise. This is, for instance, some shops are pretty strict about what modules can be used or not. So they use Stratopan as as part of their audit process to say, the things that are in are blessed. These are the things that you can use, and the things that are not in the repository are not blessed. And so they have some audit workflow that you can go through then to have things added to your Stratopan repository, and then they become blessed. What else have I?
Maybe a quick question related to that. Can you have multi-user access to manage these stacks? And can you give permissions to specific stacks? Any kind of granular permissions like that?
So that is in the pipe, and I think that is the big obstacle that Stratopan has right now towards becoming commercially viable. Right now, the repositories are owned by individuals, and there's no secure way of sharing access to it. So we're gonna solve that problem in pretty much the same way that GitHub works. You'll have organizational accounts that aren't tied to any particular user, and the organization will have teams with either read-only or read-write access to whatever repositories belong to the organization. So the model will be very familiar to most of you.
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, I got 10 minutes for questions. Hit me.
Kira's got a question.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, I can.
All right. Yeah, I was wondering. You have a way to add a module. I'm wondering if you have a way to add a list of modules, or even possibly importing a pre-existing CPAN file if you're using Carton.
Yes. So I mentioned earlier there's a set of tools that are not publicly available right now, but I sort of use them as my consulting weapon, where I could take either a CPAN file, or I could just look at your production environment, and I magically figure out exactly what you have, and then import all of that directly into the Pinto the Stratopan repository. So the short answer is no. At some point, I think Stratopan will have an API so that you could automate that in any way that you see fit. You don't have to point and click your way to a solution. But that's on the radar, yes.
That was his next question, if it had an API.
There is a very small API that doesn't do what you want it to do. There's an API that Stratopan uses to figure out where a module is. I found that's like one of the most perplexing problems in the Perl space is, where is foobar 2.6 because Perl doesn't have any rules about how you version modules. And so foobar 2.6 could be potentially in any number of distributions. And solving that problem is not trivial. And that's what makes reverse engineering a Perl environment pretty challenging. So API, I'm working with some guys in Norway to get an API put together.
Nice, good to hear.
I have a question. I've been playing with this while you've been talking, and I signed up for an account, and I just tried to load one of my distributions, Rapid App, and it barfs, cannot find a Catalyst model, DBIC schema, ~065 anywhere. And that's the latest version of that module. It's on Meta CPAN since last year. And in Rapid App, I do require latest versions of lots of deps. So I'm just curious, is your database old, outdated?
So they're 1%, and I'm not sure if your situation falls into this, but there's about 1% of CPAN that Stratopan doesn't know what to do with, usually because the metadata in that release was invalid or not not parsable or something like that. Pause is very, very forgiving when you upload stuff to it. You can be very sloppy about how you about the metadata you send with your application.
So that distribution, Catalyst model, DBIC schema, they must have broke it, because I went and I did a reverse dependencies on that package, found another thing that required it, but not a specific version, pulled that one, and it was able to find 0.64. But the very latest is 0.65, and I require 0.65. So that means they broke something in their meta JSON in the latest version.
What was it called? DBIX class schema?
Catalyst model DBIC schema. Here, it's obviously that it's not important to address right now during this live talk. But it was just I was playing with it, and that's what I ran into.
Oh, yeah, there are some. That's one of the challenges we have with Stratopan is the wild is a messy place, and in order to make Stratopan more reliable, we've made some choices to be a little more strict about what Stratopan can take. Metadata has to make sense so that you don't hang yourself down the road, and so that Stratopan can provide you with this rich interface, this rich information about your dependencies. If we were as loose as CPAN, that problem will be much harder to solve, and it may not be as useful to you. So I don't know if your distribution falls into that category, but it does exist. And what we've done, sort of on the side, we've created what we call the patch pan, which is where if people report CPAN library that don't work out in Pinto, like I said, there's about 1% of everything that's been released to CPAN falls into this category. Myself or one of my colleagues will go track that distribution down, patch it, and then put it into this separate repository so that it can be pulled into a Stratopan.
Or maybe get more verbose errors and say, hey, this can't be pulled in because go yell at him.
Yes. I'll take that.
And one last thing, when are you going to get signed in with GitHub? That's the first thing. Sign in with GitHub button.
As soon as I figure out how to make OAuth work. Would it be lame if we did Twitter and Facebook as well, or I think that would?
GitHub, I think, would be the first one that I would expect, especially because you use the exact same bootstrap styles as GitHub.com for the site. It's like, oh, it's GitHub. But
I prefer MySpace.
Twitter, pause, anything that doesn't involve me creating yet another account and another password, which I've already done now.
All right. Well, thank you for signing up, and I'll look into that. Send me the version, the name of the distribution, and the version number, and I'll look into it.
Oh, for that? Okay.
Other questions? No?
Anyone else? Anyone else? Man. I thought I did. He covered most of the questions I had already.
What JavaScript libraries are you using, out of curiosity?
jQuery, D3, and a couple other that I sort of lifted off of GitHub or some other place. I'm not a great front-end developer, so guys in Norway are going to make up for that, I hope. But it's been a really interesting project, and I think there's I don't know if it's there isn't huge commercial potential, but the value proposition I think is pretty clear. If you have a lot of distributions, if you use a lot of distributions, and I would advocate that if you're not, then you should be. If you're not, then you're reinventing wheels, and you're really shortchanging yourself. So if you're not using a lot of distributions, then you should be. And if you are using a lot of distributions, then you quickly learn that managing them doesn't come for free. And Stratopan goes a long way towards solving that problem. So you can get the best of both worlds. You can leverage open source. You can reuse and stand on the shoulders of giants, the CPAN giants, and you can manage all of that with minimum fuss.
That kind of brings up a question I had, kind of an open question to the group. We don't typically build the application that we maintain like a CPAN distribution, and so I was curious if anyone else does for their day job or for their side, for projects that they don't intend on releasing a CPAN. Do you still build your project like a CPAN distribution? Or don't you see a value in that? I was curious if anyone has any comments on that.
I use CPAN personally. Everything goes to CPAN for me.
And so yeah, right. But even Henry, even client applications that you build for them, are you still building that in the style of a CPAN distribution?
Well, no. So, like, the primary application is going to be a Git repo, and I just deploy that usually with Perl. But all the deps so far are just all public CPAN distributions. But I have suffered the pain of modules that the new version is broken or the previous version is broken, and then like stressing out over, like, the way that I've handled that is because I didn't have a solution like Stratopan, is I just chased down the authors of those modules and forced them to fix them so that everything was correct in the modern CPAN landscape. That's how I've tackled it. But if I had Stratopan, it would have probably made that a lot easier.
To some degree, Stratopan allows you to be lazy. It ensures that your Perl stack is stable, which means that you can ignore the world around you for a little bit longer, which isn't my intention, right? I always encourage my clients to try and stay towards the front edge of things.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's what I was just going to ask. What are you setting a bad example and encouraging people to not keep up with to not try new things and to not be aware of the changing landscape of CPAN? They're just going to live in their little bubble and not.
It's like, so think about GitHub, right? You have version control on your software. It allows you to go back, right? Which is a nice safety net, but it doesn't prevent you from going forward. And so I think of GitHub, I think of Stratopan the same way. I work with a lot of, I've done a number of small jobs where a client had a bunch of modules. They had no idea how they got to where they were, right? Some stuff got installed by the sysadmin, some by the developer, some of it with RPMs. Who the hell knows, right? It's just a big mess. And they need to upgrade operating systems. Right? So all their XS modules are going to break. No idea how to recreate, how to obtain the source code for those and rebuild them in the right order so that everything works as if they had installed it anew with those original versions. And so I solved that problem for them with Stratopan. I figure out what they got, and then I put it in the repository, and I say, okay, here's square one or square zero or whatever, right? You have a stable platform. Now you can evolve incrementally from there going forward, and features and things like that will eventually come to Stratopan, so that you can deal with all these kinds of problems. Like, well, you know, we upgraded Catalyst, and then a week later, all hell broke loose because we finally tickled some bug. How do we go back to the original set of dependencies? So Pinto and eventually Stratopan can solve that for you. So change is good. Change is, as long as you can manage it sensibly. And that's what we're trying to do. If you have a lot of distributions, you easily spend a couple of developer hours a month juggling these things. And Stratopan is way less. Well, right now it's free, but it will always be far less expensive than spending that time yourself.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's definitely a lot of room for tools like this because I think people don't realize how much of a pain it is that CPAN installs the latest version of a module until it's too late. I think people that don't realize that up front are always in for a rude awakening when they finally realize how important that is to lock down which modules they use. So I think it's awesome that there's tools like this out there to help manage that.
I think, to be fair, I sort of divide the world into three different categories, at least from the Stratopan perspective. You know, at the one end, you have very large and sophisticated Perl shops who have already figured out how to solve this problem on their own. You know, maybe it's not as glamorous and pretty as Stratopan, but they've figured out how to deal with the CPAN and dependencies. On the other end of the spectrum, you have very small shops where, you know, if code breaks, it doesn't matter that much, right? It's not worth the extra effort to manage something like Stratopan or to pay for something like Stratopan to deal with their dependencies. They're happy to just do it, you know, fix problems as they arrive. But in the middle, which is where I think most of us are, you're sort of on the edge where you've got a fair number of dependencies, or you would like to have you would like to use more dependencies. You know, I'd like to bring Catalyst into my organization, which has a pretty big stack. Same with DBIX class. I would like to have those things, but I don't know how to bring them in safely. Or maybe I already have them in, and I'm not yet aware of the pain that might lie ahead when I need to go to upgrade something. So I'm on a mission to go out and talk to people like you all, to see where you are and to sort of take your pulse and sell this message about dependency management. The future of software, more and more, it's all about the pieces that you build with. I think Matt Trout said it best, that he said that CPAN, Perl is the virtual machine, but CPAN is the language, right? The ability to put together existing bits of software into applications. That's what modern development is, really. It's leveraging all these other pieces that come from the open source community or other sources, right? The code that I write in-house is just a tiny, tiny bit of all the source code that goes into my application, right? It's like this much, and then all the CPAN dependencies below that are like that much or more. So historically, we kind of neglect all that stuff, right? We don't do nearly as much to manage those dependencies as we do to manage our own source code. And I really want to change that. I want dependencies to be first-class citizens and get managed in the same rigorous sort of way that we manage our own source code. Mostly because my application is mostly dependencies. It's very little of my own code. Most of the business value comes out of assembling these dependencies together in some way. So did I sell you all? Did I convince you? All right. I'm sorry.
One Stratopan, please.
So Stratopan is free right now. If you sign up as a beta user, you get a free account for life. When the commercial accounts become available, the pricing will be very reasonable. I expect it might be a little more expensive than the GitHub because at least at the sort of well, it's a more specialized product than GitHub. I don't have 100 million users that I can sell to. I have the Perl community is much smaller. So what else are we going to say about that?
Where are you hosting Stratopan? Where are you hosting Stratopan?
Maybe someday there will be an energy field that you can't ever. You certainly couldn't put. Is there a question?
Yeah, sorry, your connection kind of got delayed there. Where is Stratopan hosted right now?
On a Linode.
Cool, very cool. And is it on was it Modulicious app? What was the app, the framework for it?
Yeah, the framework is Modulicious. This was the first Mojo app I built, and I love it. I think it's. I don't have a lot of opinions about web frameworks. I just don't have a lot of experience with all the different frameworks. But Sebastian Rydell and Greg Hinkle have done a fabulous job with it. The surrounding ecosystem is great. The plugins, the documentation, all that stuff. It's very vibrant. It really is It really does rival, well, I think it rivals Rails and anything else that the other languages selling. And it's got all the Perlish flair.
Very cool.
Contemplating web frameworks.
Are you using Elasticsearch? Your database?
No. As a storage engine, Mongo.
Okay.
Each one of those repositories is a Pinto repository, and Pinto is on CPAN. It's all open source. You can take that apart. It's SQLite databases underneath.
So the type ahead, like the type ahead box, that's going to SQLite or Mongo?
That's going through Mongo.
Right.
There's a lot of we have a lot of. I think there's a lot of neat ideas that can be done with Stratopan. We're going to serve up documentation. Right now, there are links from your Stratopan repository to Meta CPAN. So if you want to browse the documentation for anything that's in your repository, you can go that way. But that doesn't help you for your homegrown distributions, or if you've patched one. I love Meta CPAN, but I find it's not the most compelling. It's not the most beautiful thing. I really want to have beautiful documentation. So we're working towards having a really quality graphic designer do the layout for documentation. So your pod can look awesome. And if your documentation looks good, then maybe you'll finally write it.
Nice.
Another thing we have in plan is you know, once you have your repository established, we're going to send out notifications, I'd say once a week or something, that'll let you know when something in your repository is upgraded, especially if there's a security-related upgrade. Just so you can stay on top of things. We can help encourage people to stay up to date and use the service and make the most of their dependencies. Something just came out of my head. I lost it. This is what happens when you don't have your...
It's all right. Well, hey, I just want to check to see if you got to get going to your meeting. I know you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, I got 4 minutes. So, any last thoughts? Any of you guys coming out to San Francisco anytime?
Oh man, I'd love to.
I was there. I just got stuck in a traffic jam and then had to fly home.
Traffic at San Francisco?
Really?
Never.
Are you coming to YAPC?
Not this year. I would really like to. I like Salt Lake City a lot.
Sorry.
It's just it doesn't work out with the calendar this year. Wesley is we have a son now, so the summers pretty much revolve around his requirements, not mine. And oh yeah, other cool things with Stratopan. So here's the community aspect to Stratopan, which I tried to sell to my fellow CPAN authors. I don't know if they all go for it or not, but there's a big question in the community about what Perl looks like in the wild, right? Because there's no, and they call that the dark pan, right? All the Perl that isn't on CPAN. And everybody wants to know, like, well, what does that look like, and what can we learn from it? And I think, you know, if Stratopan reaches a sufficient size or critical mass of some kind, then it gives us the visibility into some of that, right? I don't think Stratopan isn't going to like leak your source code out or anything, but we can report things like how many applications actually use a particular version of a module, for example. You know, how many. So if you're a module maintainer and you want to know, like, okay, well, what does my user base look like? Are they on this version? Are they on that version? Maybe you might even want to be able to have some access channel to them, some way to contact users vis-a-vis Stratopan. But bringing together all of the Perl that's in the wild, or all the Perl users in the wild, in a way, in a forum where they're allowed to share a little bit of information about what's going on under the hood. I think that could reveal a lot of valuable information to the Perl community and help it manage itself and figure out what people need. So that's I think there's a benefit to the Perl community in Stratopan, not just as a toy or as a business, but it has value to I don't know, what's the word, altruistic value to the Perl community.
Nice.
All right, that's all I got.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Jeffrey. It's really a great honor to have you give this talk. Really appreciate the work you've been doing for Stratopan and everything else, like Perl Critic and the community. So, yeah, thanks again for taking the time to do this tonight, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve, for the invitation. If you guys want to hear about Perl Critic, I have many years of practice giving presentations on that. So,
oh, very cool.
If you know, Brew City PM or some companies, if you have a sufficiently large company, I've worked with them to come in and sell them on Perl Critic. I know that it's, you know, sometimes it's difficult. Even if you, as an individual, want to use the tool, it's difficult to sell the team on the idea of bondage and discipline. So I go in and I try to win people over and show them how it helps and how to make the most of it. So it's not such a arduous thing. But I'm available for that. I'm easy to find.
Nice.
On Meta CPAN, my email address is somewhere, everywhere. I'll give it to Steve, and you can put it on your web page or something. But don't get in touch. I'd love to hear from people.
Excellent. Cool.
I emailed you the details of that. So.
What's that?
You told me to email you the package that didn't pull in Stratopan. So I'm way ahead of you.
Fabulous. See, like I said, I'm easy to find.
Perfect. Well, awesome. I'm going to have to get in touch with you for another talk later this year about Perl Critic then, so we'll take you up on that.
All right. I love it. All right.
Very cool.
Hi,
Good
luck.
Thanks again.
Good luck. Go Brewers.
Yeah. Right on.
I'm kind of a Giants fan now, but we're kind of spoiled. We've had 3 World Series in the last 6 years, so I don't think that's going to last.
Yeah, nothing does, right? So, great. Well, thanks a lot, everyone, for joining the call tonight. Appreciate it, and we'll see you guys next month. Thanks a lot.